Hi y'all, my name is Mr. Chao, and welcome to Chao Time. In this week's episode, we're going to be reviewing an unappreciated and frankly unloved Tudor Black Bay. It's this one right here. It's the bronze with the chocolate kind of caramely dial. It's on loan to me from my friends over at Doming Watches, and I'd like to give a big old shout out to them for helping me in my quest for the next watch in my collection. If you'd like to check them out or check this watch out, you can check the description below. The way these reviews work is first I score the watch against a ever-evolving rubric that gives me a total score. I then apply a value multiplier to get a value score. If you're interested in how this all works, there is a video in the top right hand corner that you can go check out. The rubric is also available in the description if you'd like to follow along. And after all that, I give a completely subjective opinion based on my experience, my emotional state, my biases and perceptions, because that's how I end up choosing the next watch in my collection. So let's get going. Before we can begin scoring the watch against the rubric, we first need to understand what the purpose of the watch is, why it exists, and what design language inspires it. Well, the watch is a retro-inspired, semi-luxury dive watch. This will help me frame the review and give the review context. We'll start with the function, feel, and visual appeal of the case. This Black Bay is made from a bronze alloy that is probably leaning towards an aluminum bronze, which in theory would make it suitable for seafaring adventures. Bronze, as I'm sure many of you are aware, patinas in an interesting way. This patina serves to protect the case from further oxidation. As it does so, it can build up over time and will need to be cleaned off. The case finishing is almost a moot point, as the patina will cover it up over time, as it has with this watch, giving the watch a uniform finish, if you'd like to call it that. Sitting on top of the case is a boxed sapphire crystal, which does slightly distort the dial at angles so extreme it will probably never negatively affect usability. Finally, the bronze bezel has a bronze-colored aluminum bezel insert and light bronze text. This insert hurts the function score for a couple of reasons. First, aluminum is not a very durable material when considering that this part of the case is most susceptible to damage. Second, and much more importantly, has to do with the chemical properties of the metals Tudor chose to use. Because the aluminum insert is dissimilar to the bronze bezel, galvanic corrosion occurs. It could be said that the aluminum, as an anode, is meant to be an expendable component as it corrodes, and is actually protecting the bronze, which is the cathode. And it would be true. However, when assessing the entire watch's longevity and ability to endure use over time, this combination causes problems. There are numerous complaints in forums about the aluminum bezel chipping and corroding within just a few months of being used in certain types of environments. Furthermore, the detent mechanism under the bezel may also cause similar issues, as seized bezels are also common enough to impact the score. However, when the watch is new, the bezel action is tight and satisfying. It requires just the right amount of pressure to turn, and each click is solid and secure. The bezel has a coin edge, which works well with the aesthetic of the watch. Speaking of touch points, the crown is also shaped and textured in a way that makes it easy and satisfying to use. The stock strap that came with this watch is leather, but I left it at Doming, so I will not comment on it. When looking at the overall design of the case, it's not hard to see a resemblance to the Rolex 14060, minus the crown guards. 8 out of 10 for form, 7 out of 10 for function. Moving on to the dial. Depending on how the watch patinas, the dial can end up being a similar color to the case, as you can see here. This almost milk chocolate color has a bit of sheen, but is not reflective per se. Continuing with the general monochrome color scheme are bronze text and minute markers. They are well printed and crisp, even under magnification. The dial as a whole is uncluttered and legible in well-lit areas. The hand and applied indices are rose gold and filled with green glowing superluminova. The lume does not appear uneven in the dark, but is ever so slightly unevenly applied in the round plots under macro inspection. The numerals, however, are nicely filled, if a bit weak in the dark. At 3 AM, the watch is a bit hard to read. The snowflake hour hand, though, is bright even in the early hours of the morning. The numerals aid in the overall retro theme of the watch. The design is uniquely Tudor's, especially when you see the snowflake hour hand. 8 out of 10 for both form and function. Let's move on to the movement. The Tudor MT5601 is an in-house 3-hander. It was recently released and therefore has a shorter track history of reliability than some other movements. The second hand sweeps along at 28,800 beats per hour. There are no additional complications. Some standout features include the 70-hour power reserve, COSC certification, and a silicone balance spring, which aids in magnetic resistance. The watch is accurate to within -4 to +6 seconds per day. There isn't much finishing on the movement, mostly brushing and sandblasting. 6.5 out of 10 for form, 5.5 out of 10 for function. That brings us to a total subjective score of 43 points out of 60. Let's move on to the lone subjective category, heritage and prestige. Tudor, as a brand, started in 1924 as a cheaper alternative to Rolex. Many of their designs look very similar to Rolex. Some models that are currently in high demand that were produced in the 90s even had Rolex branded parts, scavenging from the parts bin, and people eat that up. And therein lies the problem with Tudor. The brand is riding the coattails of its parent company, Rolex. They are slightly more daring in their designs, and their catalog has more range than Rolex. A common sentiment is that it's cheaper and more easily purchased at the AD. And I feel like that's where a lot of the positive feedback comes from. If you want a Rolex but can't get it or can't afford it, then get a Tudor. The problem with all this is that everything depends on Rolex. Everything happens in relation to Rolex, and Rolex is needed to give context to the Tudor brand. Honestly, the brand has little in the way of technological achievements or history. It serves to add a little panache to the Rolex company portfolio, where little ever changes and risks are not taken. 6 out of 10 for heritage and prestige, bringing the total score up to 49 out of 70. The watch was released in 2016 and ended production in 2019, giving it a relatively short 3-year production run. Prices have cooled recently, selling in the $3,500 USD range, which means that the value multiplier is 1.037, and the value score is 50.813 out of 70. Not the best showing of the watches I've reviewed so far, coming in just above the Seikos in total score, and dead last in the value scores. So that brings me to my personal opinion on the watch, and to be honest, I was really quite disappointed by the score, both the total score and after the value multiplier. My first experience with a high-end watch was with a Tudor Pelagos, and I really fell in love with that watch, and I really liked the brand. When I first put the watch on, I was really surprised with how well it fit for such a large watch. I have relatively small wrists at 6.5 inches or 16.5 centimeters. The 43mm width, 14.5mm height, and 52mm lug to lug sits well on the wrist on this aftermarket fabric 2-piece NATO. It's a bit bigger than the Pelagos, but wears a little bit smaller on this fabric strap, and it's really pretty comfortable. It also, because of this bronze color and the bronze dial and bronze everything else, it kind of melts into my personal skin tone, and I think it helps shrink the watch a little bit, which I guess is kind of nice. I also love the bezel on this watch. I mean, you can hear that. It's really, really nice. This is my favorite bezel. It's identical in feel to the Pelagos, and yeah, by far the best bezel I've ever had experience with. So let's talk about my biggest issue, which is going to be with the bronze case construction and material. What's really frustrating is that they could have used an inert ceramic bezel insert that's matte, just like on the Pelagos, and it would have essentially solved this entire issue. But they didn't, and I feel like it was lazy. I feel like it was just a poor design choice. And when you look at the large case size and what I think are kind of ugly, poorly loomed numerals, and then you add on the faults with the bronze, that just makes it a hard pass for me. So, do you agree with the scoring? Is there anything about the rubric that you would like to see changed or altered in any way? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any ideas for content that I should be making or watches that you would like to see reviewed, you can put those down there as well. Thanks for sticking it through to the end. Hope you enjoyed. Bye, y'all.